Hey everybody!
Hello there! How's it going, everybody?
Good. I almost did my intro for my other channel. I was gonna be like, Kuroda, Rob here. Sorry. Rob here, Andy here.
Alright, that's a wrap. Like us on Facebook. Oh, wait, we don't have a Facebook. Never mind. How's it going, Rob? Here's a question for you.
Good.
Would you say our intros are more amateurish when we do videos like this, or when we do our discography discussion videos?
I'd say that they have consistently been, like, regressing.
We have been consistently moronic.
Yeah, consistently bad. Today we got a really fun discussion. This one was my idea, which I'm going to take full credit for.
Yes, please do. And why don't you just introduce it?
Okay,
Introduce it.
so the idea for this one was, I still haven't listened to enough of Lodger, so we still haven't recorded Lodger. We will get to it, I promise. But we wanted to put out more content. We're trying to be a bit more consistent, and I thought this would be a nice, fun, easy little discussion because, you know, we've done our top 10 bands. We just did the top 5 overrated bands thing and whatnot. And, you know, I kind of think we need to do more videos like this of just, you know, our favorite music. And so what better place really to go next, I would think, than just talk about what our favorite albums of all time are. And by our favorite albums, I mean my number one favorite album of all time and your number one favorite album of all time. And we're just...
Yes, sir.
It's going to be that simple. I'm going to discuss mine, and then Andy over here is going to discuss his, and we're going to, I guess, just talk in depth about why we love the album, our history with it, the whole bit. Andy was breaking my balls because I couldn't remember exactly what his favorite album is, but to be fair, his has changed a few times. Mine's been the same since, like, God, since longer than I've known you, so... You know.
Yeah, I was telling Cass that because I've known you. Jesus, I've probably known you for 15 years at this point, right?
Yeah, at least 15 years. Yeah.
And this has always been your favorite record since I've known you.
Yep, and been my favorite album ever since. So that'll be interesting. And then yours has changed a little bit. I think I know what it is. So if it is what I think it is, then I'm gonna go. I knew it.
I know it.
And so when Andy does his, that'll be a kind of little fun element of the video. But that's it. That's pretty much the video.
Cool. I don't have anything else to add to that. So I say we kick out the jams and get started.
Okay. Awesome. All right, everybody. So my favorite album is a stone cold classic, which I'm sure yours is too, because we're pretty much. I think the music we listen to would almost qualify us as boomers. For me, certainly it would qualify. But for me, it's a classic from 1973, one of the best-selling albums of all time, hailed as one of the greatest rock albums of all time. It's on my shirt. It is Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. You didn't expect me to pull the vinyl out, did you?
No, I'm actually not surprised because I came prepared with props as well.
Good, I'm glad. So, yeah. I've probably talked about this record, I think maybe when we talked about our top 10 bands. I assume I mentioned it, but yeah,
I believe so.
This is my absolute favorite album of all time, and it has been for, like you said, at least 15 years, maybe longer than that. Since I was probably, no, it would be longer. I would say it would have been about freshman year of high school. And I would have been 14 years old. So, okay. And I'm 32 now, so then that is brain 18 years. Yeah, see, I'm suffering from brain damage right now. And here's the backside of this excellent record. Simple, but beautiful, which pretty much describes the whole record. I love this LP. It's great.
If those of you that watched our overrated bands video last week, I kind of went on a little rant about certain bands and album covers becoming like fashion trends, and I have to say, the Dark Side of the Moon, that album cover has very much become like a fashion thing almost, but having said that, it really is one of the best album covers.
Yeah, that's. I was gonna get into that later, but I don't really need to now because it really is, and
Yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier when I was prepping for this video, and I remember you mentioning that about Nirvana and bands like Metallica and lots of these other great classic bands, Zeppelin, the Beatles, even like a lot
Yeah.
of these classic, the Stones, they become brands, and this is I wrote this down in my notes. This is, aside from maybe other one album that I can think of, probably the most iconic album cover of all time. The only one I think that could potentially rival it would be Abbey Road. That's the only album that I can think of that is maybe a bit more
Yeah,
recognized than this album.
by a hair. I would say it would be Abbey Road and then for sure Dark Side
Yeah,
of the Moon.
they're just two really iconic covers, and yeah, you see
Yeah.
this everywhere now. That's a whole different discussion about the whole brand thing. Pink Floyd being my favorite band, this being my favorite album of all time. Believe me, it drives me nuts that this is a brand.
Oh, I'm
But
sure. Yeah.
at the same time, I'm wearing the T-shirt, so what are you gonna do? Although I like this one because it's got the band members in it. So, um,
Just to be clear with that, and I will not comment on it any further. Like obviously, like I don't have a problem with the band shirt. I have band shirts too.
mhm.
That's one thing. But like when you see band shirts at like, Abercrombie,
Yeah,
American Eagle, even like Walmart for Christ's sakes, and you see someone that clearly doesn't know anything about Pink Floyd, it's like, come on. But
yeah.
boomerang over.
Yeah, no, it drives me crazy too because there's a great video online of a guy asking people to name 3 songs. I think we were talking about that last time.
Second
But
time
anyway,
we've referenced that
Pink
video.
Floyd, Dark
Anyways.
Side of the Moon. I'm gonna just put the record down for now, and I'll probably pull it back out. So, why is this my favorite album? The first thing I want to talk about is my personal history with it. So, this is the album that got me into music. And while like I know just because something's your first doesn't mean that you really owe it anything. But I think this being my first album, and when I say first album, I mean I heard lots of other music before Dark Side of the Moon. I think I even heard other albums before Dark Side of the Moon, but I was really not ever into music until about 13, 14 years old. And the reason for that is that when I was growing up, popular music that we were listening to in the mid 90s and stuff, which by the way I've grown to appreciate some of, but at the time I just didn't connect with it, didn't really like a lot of it. Never just was never my thing. And as far as like what we listened to at home, my mom always listened to like, you ever listen? You know who Delilah is in the soft rock station?
Yeah.
I heard
Delilah!
that so much, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
And she would listen to
My mom
country,
used to listen to Delilah
and
too.
she would listen to country, and not the good country, not like Johnny Cash stuff like that. I had to listen to like the Dixie Chicks and stuff all day. So, I was way more into video games. I was way more into other things, and music really wasn't like my thing. And to tell like a really quick story as to how I discovered this, my dad, who from him I only really heard the Beatles, which I always loved the Beatles, but but they weren't my band. They later on became a band that I got into on my own, but they didn't grab me and get me into music. But there was one night, I was on the computer and my dad asked me, because my dad knows nothing about, like, he's horrible with technology still to this day, and he said, "Can you get music on there?" And I said, "Yeah, I can." And he's like, "Look up Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon." So I was like, all right. And we put it on and it blew my mind. Like, I was like, I've never heard anything like this before. I didn't know music could be like this. Really the only thing I liked that I would listen to on my own up until that point would be like video game music, because I just identified it with the games and stuff. Still love video game music, by the way. But so I heard it, and then I asked my mom, I was like, do you mind if I order a CD on Amazon? And she said, no, that's fine. And I ordered Dark Side of the Moon. And I remember it, like, eagerly waiting for it for it to come in the mail, because I'm gonna just admit, I downloaded it on, I think it was LimeWire or something. I only downloaded select tracks, so I didn't hear the full album.
Ooh.
So I remember eagerly waiting for that package to come in the mail, and it came in, and I remember it was like after everybody kind of settled in for the night, and my dad and I sat in the kitchen, and we had a CD player, and we listened to this album for the first time. And I was looking at the cover. It was like the classic story. I was like looking at the cover. I was looking inside at the booklet, and like the CD booklet looks just like this. And there's like pictures of the band, and I'm reading the lyrics and stuff, and my mind was just totally, totally fucking blown. And I've always said it was my gateway into music. Then I was listening to Bowie. He was a very early one, because I'm like, Dad, you gotta recommend me more music. He's like, oh, you should hear Bowie. You should hear Queen. You should hear Led Zeppelin. You should hear T-Rex. He's the reason T-Rex was one of the first bands I got into. And then I revisited the Beatles, and then it just opened the floodgates for me. So
Yeah.
this record to me has a lot of it has a lot of sentimental value, in the sense that it was the album that got me into music. It's an album and a band that I bond with my dad, who I don't bond with on a lot of things, but music has always been something that we could actually relate on some level with. And I just, to this day, still love the album, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons why, which I'm going to get into. While I look it up, did you have anything that you wanted to say about it? Because I'm kind of curious when the first time you heard the album is.
When the first time I heard Dark Side of the Moon, I don't remember. I want to say I remember The Wall being the first Pink Floyd album I listened to. I'd mentioned in the Overrated Bands video that Queen, Led Zeppelin, and Pink Floyd were like my starter bands.
Oh, it's a perfect starter kit. And throw some AC/DC in there. You got the perfect rock starter kit.
Yeah. I think they might have been a little later, but it was definitely those three bands for sure. And you said 13, 14. I was probably 14, 15 myself. And my buddy Kevin, he was the one that got me into these bands. And I remember I was at his house, and his dad listened to all of this stuff. And this was right around the time where iPods were really big in our generation. I think I had just gotten my first iPod. And so Kevin lent me a stack of CDs. I remember, again, it had Queen, Zeppelin, Floyd. Actually, it might have had AC/DC in it, I'm thinking about it. The Beatles, U2. So much stuff was just there. And I can't remember when or how I got into Dark Side of the Moon. But I remember that's what you and our mutual friend Dan, we bonded over. I remember I knew Dan a little bit in high school, but when we first started becoming buddies was it was the first day of school my junior year and his senior year, and I had a Pink Floyd The Wall shirt, and he had a Floyd Dark Side of the Moon shirt, and we just kind of did one of these things, like, that's cool. And then 30 minutes went by, and we both discovered that we had gym class together. So, we just kind of continued our conversation from there. Talked about Pink Floyd, talked about, whatever we were talking about. I don't remember. And that was kind of, as I'm retelling the story, Pink Floyd might have been the foundation of our friendship, because you guys were looking to put a band together, and this was right around the time when I started talking to Dan, and I think Dan had said to you, I've been talking to this kid at Newton, and he plays guitar, and I knew you a little bit before all of this happened, but I think Pink Floyd really might have been how we kind of became buddies.
And you and I used to debate on which was better, Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here, but that's a different story. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I'll talk about that when I get to my favorite album in a little
yeah,
bit.
but so in terms of this particular record, so I kind of wrote a few notes and I divided some things up that I wanted to talk about. So the first thing I want to talk about is like how it shaped my taste in music because this album, in terms of structure, music, lyrics, production, maybe fairly or unfairly, I don't know, maybe just because it was my basis, I always put other albums up against this album. Not that like I think anything is gonna beat it, but just um, in terms of this album, and this is another point I want to talk about, is this. You and I have talked. I recall us talking about this specifically when we talked about the mainstream, when we did the mainstream music rant, uh, and we were both talking about we are album people, and that's just how we listen to stuff. This album, I think, is the reason why the album format is still my favorite way to listen to albums.
It's a good example of that,
It
for
has
sure.
a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. It has it's not a concept album, but it's very a thematic album where there isn't some overall like story or anything like that, but it addresses lyrically similar themes. The music like blends together. There's pretty much throughout the entire album, except for I think it's from Great Gig in the Sky and Money, and even then the transition doesn't really feel that weird because that's when that's the different sides of the album or whatever. But it's the whole album seamlessly transitions into the next song. Um, and some of those things obviously I'm not expecting every album to do, but it did make me look at music in a different way. It made me look at music instead of like, okay, they're just songs on the radio or just songs you hear in the background to, oh, this can be an experience. You can sit down, you can listen to a record or a CD, a whole album, and it's actually like a journey, or it can make a statement, or it can just be it's like sitting down and reading a book, or uh, watching a movie or something. Like it can be a full experience. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things, biggest ways that this album influenced the way that I listen to music. And in terms of the actual music itself, I think it gave me an appreciation for experimental music, for rock music, because it was probably the first proper rock and roll album that I really, really got into. And just a fan of very atmospheric and melodic music. And I love the way that it marries um, experimental, experimental sounds, and a little less the playing, I'd say, than a band like King Crimson or something like that. But even so, I think the way that they play is really unique. Nobody sounds like the Floyd. Um,
I
but
think to oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
it mixes it with melodic and really,
Hmm.
accessible music. And we talk about with bands like Talking Heads and with Bowie, we've talked a bunch about this subtle complexity. And this album to me is the king of albums like that, because it's just an incredibly rich and layered record. I mean, it's crazy how much is crammed in that 45 minutes or so that you're listening to the album. So sorry, what were
Yeah.
you gonna say before I move on?
No, I was just agreeing with what you were saying. Um, you and I both, I think, really, more than most of our friends, really like experimental music,
Hmm.
and I think Dark Side of the Moon um, was sort of the you know um, I don't know, like the introduction to experimental rock.
Yeah.
It has, like you said, that simple complexity, which is, I think, brilliant in of itself. The fact that you can be a little out there, but still have this, pop accessible sensibility, I think is brilliant in of itself. Is it the most experimental record? Absolutely not.
No, no.
Um, but it was definitely a really important blueprint, at least for me, and clearly, for you too, as far as, you know, maybe being a little more ambitious and dipping my feet into something that I wouldn't normally, you know, venture myself out into.
And it
Um,
helped me open the door to people like Frank Zappa or somebody
yeah,
or like bands like Yes and stuff like a lot of progressive rock, a lot of um, stuff like that, or even like you said, like some art rock, that kind of stuff. Just anything that's a little off the beaten path, you know. I think Dark Side of the Moon is a really great example of that experimental as using that experimental um, I guess that experimental mindset in making a record, but making it accessible as well, you know. And I just love that about it. Um, in terms of the music itself, I think the musicianship is excellent. I think, you know, I mean, it's not Yes, King Crimson. It's not like super. Um, the musicality isn't incredible, but
it
the
doesn't need to be.
it
It
doesn't.
doesn't
No,
need
it
to
doesn't
be.
need to be. And I think I really think there's just certain levels of excellence, and it's still there's excellent musicianship.
They've really matured
Yeah. Well, that's the other.
this point in their career. They've had so many records up until this point.
Yep.
And being a Barrett fan and The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, one of my favorite Floyd records, um, quite possibly I like that record more than Dark Side of the Moon. But I mean, you can't deny
Yeah.
from where they started on that record to where they got with Dark Side, and literally everything in between was very much like, like that next step. But like they were doing some really goofy things in the beginning of their career. Um,
You actually got
so
me.
just kind of,
You're kind of getting me to skip ahead here, but it's okay. What I was gonna say,
I'm sorry.
to me, this is the album I put down that this is the album that, to me, it feels like the album that basically almost every album post Sid was working up to. Because it was like they
Absolutely.
made this record. It was like they found their sound. They came close with like metal and and like some of the Obscured by Cloud stuff, and to me even Atom Heart Mother and whatever. But to me, this was the record where it's like this is the Pink Floyd sound. This is the sound that now everybody is going to know them and identify them with. You know, and it's the album that really catapulted them into superstardom. They were pretty the UK. They were really well known, but in terms of internationally, especially over here, nobody really knew Pink Floyd. They were pretty underground. And then this record came out, and they just became like absolute superstars. You know, and by superstars I mean the band did. There's still people who don't really know who did the album.
Yeah,
Um,
but you know what? This record in of itself was a superstar.
yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon came out in 1973. They were touring this record for the next 4 years.
Oh yeah.
They
And they brought it
they
back
didn't
several
even
times.
support "Wish You Were Here"
Yeah.
until the Animals tour.
I know. Yeah.
That's how huge this record was.
Oh yeah. It's crazy. So in terms of the musicianship, this is what I want to say. I was going to say that I think the musicianship is excellent. I think that each member does some very interesting thing musically, and one of my favorite things, and this may be where you disagree with me or not, but for me, the best Pink Floyd is when they're all working together. There's been many different moments in this band's career. There's an exception to that, in my opinion, with one album, which I'll get to in a second. But um, there's there's been several different points in this career. I actually think you think I'm gonna say something that I'm not, but
Oh,
we'll
okay.
reference that.
I'm getting out of
So in the
myself.
beginning, it was like all about Sid, and then at a certain
Yeah.
point, it became all about Waters. Then he was gone, and then it kind of became a Gilmore thing.
Hmm.
To me, the best Floyd is when the four of them are working together, and
Agreed.
it's the four band members contributing equally to it, all bringing stuff to the table. That's when you get records like Metal, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here. The exception I was going to say was Animals, because Roger Waters really spearheaded that album a lot, and that's one of my favorite Pink Floyd albums. But
Yeah.
even so, in terms of the playing and like what they were doing on that record, you can even see that the other guys had some input there too. But with this album, I was going to say that each of the members, Gilmore's guitar solos, I think like the guitar solo in Time might be my favorite guitar solo he has ever done. I know a lot of people say Comfortably Numb, but I think it's probably the best guitar solo. I adore that guitar solo.
I might be with you,
You know,
on that. As far as Gilmore solos,
Yeah.
I think I like the Time solo
like that
better.
that is one of the greatest guitar solos of all time. And
I agree.
Comfortably Numb is amazing too, but that song is great. And he does a lot of other great riffing, and his vocals are wonderful on this album, and go really well with who I think is the unsung hero of the band, and certainly this album, Richard Wright. They sing a lot of harmonies on this, and especially in Us and Them and Time and Breathe. Like, they are just fantastic together. I think Rick Wright's vocals, and even more so than that, his piano playing, like Great Gig in the Sky, Us and Them, and then just like the incredible amount of keyboard textures he added. And if you look on the record, he uses so many different instruments. It's ridiculous. Yeah, they kind of oversimplify it on the original record, but like if you look at the CD re-releases, it gives like a huge list of instruments he played, and he adds a lot to this record, and you can really hear that he contributed a lot to this. Waters, he has a lot of great moments too with just his bass playing. Obviously, Money, and some of the stuff like the intro and Time, and I think that's even him that plays like the acoustic. Like some of the rhythm guitar and like Brain Damage, Eclipse. That's all Waters.
I believe so.
And of course, his lyrics, which I'll get into a second, are incredible. And Nick Mason, Nick Mason is also like, to me, Nick Mason is like a Ringo. He's really great, but he's also really simple. He just knows when to hit, when and where to hit those, hit the drums. It's great. And that intro again of Time, I love what he does in that intro. What I wrote here was Waters' lyrics are incredibly relevant to today, and he tackles philosophical and moral themes. Lyrics like Time, Us and Them, and Money, they really capture a lot of the human experience, and the music helps to give them emotional weight, which I think kind of says it all really about his lyrics, and the marriage between his like lyrics and music. I think it's just a perfect blend. You and I have talked about this before. I'm not like I'm as long as it's a good song, I don't really care a ton about lyrics, but I love philosophical and like deeper lyrics. That's my favorite kind of lyrics, rather than just like love songs or just some nonsense. I do really like lyrics that make you think, and I always felt like the lyrics on a lot of Pink Floyd's albums really did that. They really made you think. And this to me is maybe not my absolute favorite album of theirs lyrically, but it's up there. There's a lot of really great, like, especially like think like a line like that I think of now as I get older. Every year is getting shorter, never seem to find the time. It's so true. It's when you're listening to that when you're 15, it's like, oh, what's this about? And then when you're 32, you listen back and you're like, that is so true. They were totally in my position there when,
I think that's why that's a good example of why I'm fascinated that it's it's maintained to be your favorite record.
Yeah.
Because you've grown up with it, so
Yeah.
it had different meaning to you when you were 15, and now you're 32 years old, and you've developed a new
Yeah.
meaning of it. You're still, after all of these years, you're discovering new things, or
Yeah,
maybe something you thought about a particular line or a lyric in a
it
song
changes. Yeah.
has a completely different meaning to you now.
And on the flip
I
side,
think
even
that's
musically, like even I've listened to this album at least 100 times, more than that.
it has to be more than that.
And
Has to be more
every
than that.
time it feels like almost every time I hear it, I hear some little subtle nuance, and I'm like, never noticed that
Sure.
before. And it's incredible, like how like layered and rich this album is. It's unbelievable. There's a few albums like that, but this to me is the big one. And I will say that I realize for people who think I'm blowing a lot of smoke up this album's ass, well I am. But I realize that if you're a person who listens to mainstream rock radio, some of these songs get played to death. There's a reason I don't listen to mainstream rock radio, and why I listen to this very rarely. Very rarely. I treat myself to this album. I do not listen to this album very often at all. I listen to this on average maybe once a year. That's how much I listen to it. I listened to it twice this year, and that's the most I've listened to it in probably the last 5. So,
And that's probably because of preparing for this
yeah,
video.
well, I wanted to listen to it again, listening to it. I was really thinking about the song Time, and I had it in my head, but yeah, anyway, let me wrap this up so you can actually get to yours. So, really quickly, in terms of Pink Floyd, there's a couple things I want to say. Actually, never mind. I went over all of it. Never mind. Forget it. Except for the last one is undoubtedly their masterpiece. There you go.
It is undoubtedly their masterpiece.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree with you on that one.
Fair enough. It's your opinion.
That's okay.
So, just one more thing of it, and then I'm gonna give my final thoughts on it, so you can actually do yours. So, in terms of legacy and impact, I think that aside from my opinion, I think there's a lot that you could say about this album that really, if it's not the greatest album of all time, fine. I'm sure there's a lot of people who disagree with me. There's a reason it's considered one of the greatest albums of all time, and I personally don't think it's overrated. Number one, it's the longest charting album in history. It was on the charts for 14 years, which is crazy. We talked about this already. Probably the most iconic album cover in history, except for Abbey Road. It was incredibly influential on other albums, especially in terms of production. We also haven't talked about Alan Parsons, who engineered the album, who literally created the Alan Parsons Project to try to do another Dark Side of the Moon. That is the reason that that band exists. And he did some amazing stuff on here. And also I would say that it's incredibly critically and commercially successful. To me, despite its experimental nature and it not really being a pop album, it's one of those rare instances in popular music where true, honest, creative freedom leads to incredible commercial success. And I still think this album, in a way, has no business being as huge as it is. I think if it, I personally don't think if it came out today, it would have had the impact that it did. I think the 70s, particularly when it came out, I think it came out at a time where it was the perfect time for that album to come out. And like maybe it still would have been big, but I don't think it would have been nearly on the level that it is now. That's my opinion. Maybe you agree or not.
Yeah.
And finally, because my throat's getting raw here, my final thoughts. Dark Side of the Moon is a masterpiece, an album I only occasionally treat myself to as I said before, in order to avoid it being overplayed. I love every song, and the music is both dark and experimental and incredibly light and uplifting. I love that combination of light and dark. You get some of those darker themes in here. Some of the music can be a little darker. I think it's something like On the Run, or like some of the weird, like the guy laughing in it, and just some of the themes. But then you get like those backup singers who kind of add those big choruses, and just the melodic nature of it. It's also really there's something really uplifting about it too, and really adds that emotional weight to it. So yeah, I think it's a perfect blend of light and dark, and well, it is the dark side of the moon,
The Dark Side of the
I know.
Moon.
And I'll see you there. I'll see you there.
God damn it, you beat me to it.
And by
All
the
right.
way,
Well,
and not just that, can we talk about that? How Eclipse Brain Damage is like one of the best album closers ever. Like, come on.
it's a trippy album closer, that's for sure.
And the sun is eclipsed by the moon. Come on.
All right, enough with you. Enough.
Dark Side of the Moon. Dark Side of Dark Side of the Moon.
Dark
My
Side of
favorite
the
album
Moon.
of all time.
It is a great record for sure. All right, so I guess we'll transition to my favorite album. And
Let's see if I was right.
What's that?
Let's see if I was right.
Let's see if you were right. So before I reveal that, unlike Rob, yes, I have had a few favorite albums over the years. And I think
Nothing wrong with that.
it's admirable that you've been consistent with your favorite album. I think it's pretty normal. I
Yeah.
think, your tastes change, your tastes evolve, you discover new things, you
Of course.
go back to things. So
Can I say one thing just on that? It's funny because you're absolutely right. Your tastes change, and I'm even hard pressed to say sometimes what my favorite band or album is, because I often feel like it's just what I'm really into at the moment. Like,
at the moment,
I don't know
yeah.
if I think we've discussed that too. But just as a fun little joke, I'm always like, is Dark Side of the Moon really my favorite album anymore? And then I put it on, I'm like, yeah, it is.
Well, I feel that way about this record.
Yeah.
And this has maintained my favorite album for 5 years now. I seem to recall Dream Theater Scenes from a Memory, probably album I considered my all-time favorite.
Yep, I remember that.
At one point, Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here I considered to be my favorite album. And a little more recently, prior to this record, Radiohead's OK Computer, which is still one of my favorite albums of all time. But the favorite album, like I said, since at least 2015, it's gonna be this guy right here.
Yes, I knew it. I knew it. Okay, I thought it was between that or the White Album, because you're such a Beatles nut. So, but
White Album's my second favorite album.
okay.
So yeah, Pet Sounds. I got my vinyl copy here. I have probably 5 copies of this.
I'm glad we
I'm
both
not
busted out the vinyl. It's about damn time.
I've got this is the 50th anniversary CD set. Came out 5 years ago. I'm showing you nothing here. Yeah, so CDs.
Love it.
All
Wow,
sorts
that's nice.
cool, nerdy stuff. Yeah, so this was a awesome find, awesome purchase. And then I have, at least in addition to this, because this is a 6 CD set.
Oh, that's a CD. I'm sorry. For a second, I thought it was a record. My apologies.
Yeah, this is a CD. This is the vinyl.
Oh, okay.
And I probably have 2 other CD copies of it as well.
Can I ask you a very brief question? Because this is an album I've only heard like once.
Yeah.
What is the definitive version to listen to if you were going to experience this album for the first time?
The definitive version? Well, I think not so much the definitive version would be the question to ask, as much as the definitive sound.
That's what I mean, yeah. Like, not...
Pet Sounds came out when mono recording was at its peak.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Wilson recorded it in mono, and the main reason was because he was deaf in one ear. He was beaten by his father growing up to the point where he lost hearing. I don't remember in which ear it was. But I watched an interview with one of their other producers later on, where he was talking about that once, recording studios were making the transition from mono to stereo in the late 60s, Brian really struggled with adjusting to stereo, because he would hear things in stereo and it just sounded like white noise to him. he was just used to hearing everything in his head in mono. Having said all that, I think stereo is the proper format, especially if you have a good pair of headphones. Um, just hearing, how spread out this particular album is in stereo, I think it's just next to none. Me personally.
Is there a
I've
remaster
never.
or something of it that's particularly good, or was there like a remix done or anything? I don't really know the album well, so.
You can't go wrong with both the vinyl and the CD box that I just showed you were the 50th anniversary
Okay.
editions.
Hmm.
So those remasters are the way to go. Um, I'm trying to this album's been re-released so many times. If you can get a hold of the 40th anniversary, that's pretty good. If you're into CDs still, I wouldn't do anything before the 40th anniversary. But if you get a hold of the 40th or the 50th anniversary or any copy on vinyl, preferably stereo, you're good to go. You're good to go. That's my little audiophile rant there.
Okay.
But Pet Sounds. So how did I get into this record? I think we've talked about this on the channel before. You and I are both users of RateYourMusic.com. I've been using it for 13, 14 years. Rate Your Music is probably solely where I discovered the majority of my music. And not that that's how I discovered the Beach Boys, but I do remember when I was really getting into music, Rate Your Music was my source for music. And I would always check out like the top rated album sections. Your Dark Side of the Moons would always pop up, your Abbey Roads, Velvet Underground and Nico, and Pet Sounds.
I recall also seeing it. I also having used Rate Your Music a lot, especially back in the day. I also remember seeing Pet Sounds all over, like greatest albums list, and I think it's number one for that year, isn't it?
It is, yes,
Yeah.
for 1966.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, come on, 66 might be considered one of the greatest years, because in any other year, Revolver would be my number one, but it has to be number two in 1966. But I digress. So Pet Sounds I've had in my music collection pretty early on. I remember getting that CD towards the earlier, years of CD purchasing. And I've always loved the album. I've always loved Pet Sounds. But I never really got the Beach Boys outside of Pet Sounds. I was like, oh, they're just that band that sings annoying surf songs. So fast forward to 2014, 2015. In college, I was really getting into the Beatles. Beatles are my favorite band. For those of you that don't know, I've said that probably several times on the channel. So that was like right around the time where I was looking for other things that were similar to the Beatles. And I was reading up on the friendly rivalry that the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson specifically, and the Beatles were having. And I got really fascinated with that story. And so I went back to Pet Sounds and I was like, this nothing sounds like this. But then what really got me obsessed with this album was Brian Wilson's story. There is no musician that I've spent countless hours in just reading about, watching documentaries about, than Brian Wilson. I just find his story and what that man has gone through, his whole career, his whole life, quite frankly, just fascinating. This record is very much an early autobiography of this man's life. When I started dating my now fiance, very few bands we can compromise with when we're listening to music together, whether it's in the car or whatever. The Beatles being one of them, but same thing with the Beach Boys. And this record, I think, why it has such a special place in my heart is, along with probably Abbey Road, I would say, are like our albums. We can both just throw it on. We can both throw Pet Sounds and Abbey Road on. I think too, a lot of my musical tastes are just summarized on this record. I talked about in our top 5 overrated bands episode that one of my gripes with Queen is how everyone raves about how they're genre bending. They incorporate so many different styles of music. And yeah, they do. I just don't think the execution's there. This band, this record specifically, is an example of taking different musical ideas, experimenting with different sounds, and making it sound cohesive. This is an example of that. And this very much became a blueprint for a lot of pop groups and rock groups for being experimental. I'm going to go on a limb and say that I think there can be an argument to be made that this could be considered one of the first progressive rock albums. It just meets so much of the criteria that's in prog rock, one of which are the vocals, specifically the harmonies. I mean, the harmonies, and not even just Pet Sounds, but with like in the Beach Boys as a whole, I think, yes, absolutely pulled from
Oh
that.
yeah, they
Even just what you could do in the studio from a recording aspect. I have to believe that someone like Robert Fripp would have absolutely appreciated what Brian Wilson was doing on this record. I have to believe that even someone like Frank Zappa, who rarely gave a compliment to another fellow contemporary musician, had to have seen something good in this record.
He seemed to be better with musicians in private than he was publicly, though.
That's true. Lou Reed, who is another example of someone who very rare to get a compliment from that man, has gone on record and has said what Brian Wilson did on this record will stand the test of time. And I think he's absolutely right with that statement. You know, I'm sorry that the historical aspect of my love for this album isn't quite what yours is for Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, don't
and part
worry
of
about
it's
it.
just because it's recent. Like I said, I've only declared this album my favorite album, you know, within the past 5 years or so, 6 years now. But I this is an album, like you said with Dark Side, I rarely listen to. I treat myself to
Yeah,
this.
you have to treat yourself to your favorites.
But no other album makes me feel the way I do when I listen to this record. Cass and I went out to dinner tonight, and I decided to put Pet Sounds on in preparation for this. And I mean, I was in the moment, driving in thunderstorm, she's talking in the background, and I'm focused on this music and nothing more. And the feeling and the joy that I get when I listen to this album from start to finish is just like nothing else. It's like it's like a drug. Not to sound corny or cheesy or anything like that, but it really is.
Yeah, it's exactly how I feel about Dark Side of the Moon.
You know,
that's when you know it's your favorite.
And although it's a record that I rarely treat myself to, I could put it on whenever. And I think it's a perfect record. I get really nerdy when it comes to like star ratings with my albums, especially with 5-star albums. And I have 2 criteria that have to be met. It's 1 or 2 that have to be met for me to consider something to be a 5-star album. One is, I think the record is perfect. I can't I can't identify a single flaw. And the other is personal attachment. I tend to have more 5-star records that lead more towards the personal attachment. There are very few records that I think are just near perfect. This is the only album that for me meets the criteria for both.
Yeah.
I have the personal attachment with this, um, but I just think it's damn perfect. I really do. And I think that's why I can, with confidence, declare this as my favorite album of all time. Um, I
Also, I would say that I'm sure you'll agree with me that judging just on personal attachment alone even is totally valid, because what other reason do we listen to music for, right? For the you know, the joy of it, you know? And there
yeah,
is this deep emotional connection that you can have with music, and it can take you back to it can be nostalgic and take you back to places, but it can also, like, it just touches you on a deeper level than a lot of other things.
absolutely. In addition to this being my favorite album, this record has my favorite song of all time that I think um, my fiance would agree. We would kind of consider it to be our song, and that's God Only Knows. My favorite song. Paul McCartney's favorite song, too, fun fact. But I think that looking back, and I got into this record in my mid 20s, I'm now 30. This record was very much the soundtrack of my 20s. You had said the Dark Side of the Moon um, isn't necessarily a concept record, but it has a overarching theme.
Yeah.
And Pet Sounds is pretty similar in that aspect. It's not really a concept album per se, but there is a theme going on here. And I almost feel as if the theme of this record is growing up, right? Um, and I spent the majority of my 20s figuring out who and what I wanted to be, and just figuring out what my purpose was in life. And that's this record. I mean, from the opening track, Wouldn't It Be Nice, a song about this younger couple fantasizing, you know, adulthood essentially, to a song like I just wasn't made for these times. I feel like that might be my song that defines who I am, getting, you know, getting frustrated that I can't get my peers to relate to me because a lot of my interests are dated interests, being into older music, appreciating more older pop culture, films, media, things like that. Um, to I could just go on to a song like You Still Believe in Me. Um, the soundtrack to my life. It's the best way I can sum this record. Is it's about growing up and figuring out the world and where you fit in it. Um, I'm obsessed with this record so much that Cass and I have seen Brian Wilson live twice. The second time we saw him perform all of Pet Sounds live.
Oh, that's lucky.
It was, dude, it was incredible. But he did one show in Boston that we weren't able to go to. But the one show in Boston that he did was with an orchestra. And I'm going to get to the orchestration on this record in a second because I think the Wrecking Crew is worth talking about. But to hear, that's the closest you're going to hear this record live, was with the addition of the orchestra. And so we planned a whole vacation in Boston around seeing Brian Wilson performing Pet Sounds.
Wow.
Unfortunately, long story short, we weren't able to get tickets for that show. We still did the Boston trip, but we ended up seeing him locally anyways. So still got to see the album done live. But yeah. Um, you know, if that doesn't, summarize my obsession with the record, then I don't know what does. But the legacy that this record has from a recording standpoint, the fact that this is now 55, this record just turned 55.
Yeah, damn.
It just had its 55th anniversary a week ago, and it sounds so fresh. It sounds so contemporary. This record could have absolutely been made today. The musicianship on this album, so I mentioned the Wrecking Crew. The Wrecking Crew were this group of studio musicians that worked with Phil Spector and played on all of his records that he produced throughout the 60s. Brian Wilson was like a Phil Spector aficionado. Like Phil Spector was his god, so to speak. It's just incredible. The only album on all three of Rolling Stone's top 500 lists, albums list, which, take those with a grain of salt. It has maintained its number 2 position in all three lists. The 2003, 2012, and the recent 2020 edition. It has maintained its number 2 spot, which, again, it's Rolling Stones, so take that as you will, but, I do think that does say something, that the legacy and the influence that this record still has today. I don't really know if I have too much more to add on to it. Other than I just think it's a work of art. It's a work of art. I'm just infatuated with it. I don't ever see anything topping this record for me as far as my favorite album. There's historical significance to it. There's personal significance to it. And I really think it encapsulates, I can't talk, my musical tastes. It's got a little bit of everything on here.
Well, it's the summer now. Here in upstate New York, we can get some nice, warm weather, except for today. It was crappy. So maybe it's time that I, put on some headphones and listen to Pet Sounds, because it's an album that I've been meaning to give its due for quite a long time. And side note, it's kind of funny that we both picked records that are really, really commercially successful and often considered, the best of all time. But I guess there's a reason for that, right? So,
sure.
But yeah, I don't know. I have very little exposure to Pet Sounds, so maybe I just need to give it a shot and let it click. I love the Beach Boys though.
I think part of the reason why, for people that have been reluctant to check out Pet Sounds, is because of the Beach Boys, quite frankly. And I've always said that there are 2 Beach Boys, and I love both, by the way. There's the Mike Love Beach Boys, which is the, Surfin' USA, I Get Around, and that stuff is great. But then there's also the Brian Wilson Beach Boys. The stuff that is just out of this world, top notch. And that's your Pet Sounds, that's your, what would become later Smile. But a lot of the stuff that they did after Brian left the band, when Carl Wilson and Dennis Wilson were becoming more involved, it's just so underappreciated and so good. They very much, throughout the early 70s, carried the torch for Brian. But I think that's why a lot of people who have been reluctant to check out this record in particular, that's the reason, because they just associate with America's band. And don't get me wrong, the Beach Boys,
I love them.
I love them too. They very much become a parody of themselves. I mean, even from a touring aspect, there's essentially 2 Beach Boys. There's the actual touring Beach Boys, which is with Mike Love, and then there's Brian Wilson, and he tours with a guy named Al Jardine, who's one of the original members as well. So I think that's why people don't listen to at least this era is because they associate it with the laughable side of the Beach Boys. You know,
How did that album do?
remember the Full House days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
How did that record do compared to the rest of their albums? Is it
Interesting enough, it at the time it was one of their lowest charting. Now here's the thing: by lowest
it
charting,
was like
it
5.
still charted like number
Yeah, I was
six,
gonna say, yeah.
right? But right from the get-go, it was critically acclaimed. Um, I remember reading a story where I don't remember if Brian had sent them a copy, but um, John and Paul got a copy of Pet Sounds before it came out, and they just sat and listened to it on repeat over and over and over again. And I meant to talk about that actually. What really influenced Pet Sounds was when Brian heard Rubber Soul. And I've said this before, Rubber Soul really was like, not saying that it was the first, but it was the record that really pioneered what you could do with the LP format. You know, in terms of the Beatles, it was the first Beatles record where really like the LP format was taken into consideration, and every single one of those songs served the purpose for the album, right? They weren't just like 3 singles and a bunch of just, you know, B-rated stuff. Brian Wilson heard Rubber Soul and he was just like enamored with it.
I
And
think Rubber
his
Soul
response,
is one of the Beatles' most is one of the Beatles' best albums. I love
I
Rubber.
agree, by
I've
the way.
always loved Rubber Soul.
Yeah, Rubber Soul's a classic. Rubber Soul was the result of this, Pet Sounds. John and Paul heard this record and their response
Was
was
Revolver?
Sergeant Pepper's.
Oh, was Sergeant Pepper? I thought it was Revolver.
Revolver came out. Revolver might have came out just before Pet Sounds. They came out the same year, but this was the record that really inspired Sergeant Pepper.
I can't believe that uh that Revolver and Freak Out all came out in '66. You know,
And Blonde on Blonde,
Blonde on Blonde came out in '66 too. That's right. Yeah.
1966. It's a loaded year.
Yeah.
I mean, I truly believe, I think the greatest eras, like gaps of music or whatever, for the LP format were 66 to 70, and then again 77 to 80.
Oh, come on, man. 73. 73.
I'm not saying in terms of
Oh.
73 is overrated, but I'm not saying in terms of individual years. I'm just saying in terms of gaps.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Dude, I would say 70s. I'd put
73.
73 probably in the middle.
73.
But that's okay.
72
That's
is good. I'd have
that
to
is a
look, I'd have to look at
conversation.
I'd have to look at lists of to be sure. But
It's off the top of my head too, but that is a topic for another day. Yeah, I love the Beach Boys. I love them. I feel I'm like the staunch Beach Boys defender.
I'm gonna have to give Pet, like I said, even before I knew you were super into the album, and like I said, I also recall from Rate Your Music seeing that album everywhere, and I was always kind of like, I like the Beach Boys, I should check that out, and for some reason, I listened to it like maybe once, but I need to really just sit down and give it some, maybe after Lodger.
Yeah, there you go. Well, listen, Pet Sounds is only 33 minutes.
That's
so
easy, yeah.
It's an easy one, and it's an easy one to digest, despite how, you know, for its time at least, experimental it is, and you know, and whatnot. But it's an easy listen in comparison. You know, it makes me wonder if Brian had put Smile out in 1967. I think we would be looking at the whole scope of music differently. If Smile saw the light of day in 1967. I think at the very least, if Smile was released in 1967, that would be the record that we would associate with the 1960s and not Sgt. Pepper.
That'd be interesting. Now, what did they release after Pet Sounds? I don't know the Beach Boys' history very well.
In a nutshell, Brian immediately worked on, and that was the thing. Mike Love specifically did not like a lot of what Brian was doing with Pet Sounds. I mean, the Beach Boys, essentially at this point, Brian was not touring with the Beach Boys anymore. He would record and write the songs. The boys would be touring, and then they would come back periodically to the studio. And on this record specifically, they were essentially studio musicians. Brian very much utilized them as studio musicians, which, if you're familiar with Mike Love and his ego, he didn't appreciate that. So when Brian started working on Smile was like completely out there, and you should check out the Smile sessions too. It's worth listening to, but it got to a point where the rest of the band heard what Brian was doing for Smile, and they're like, we're not putting this out. And so they followed Pet Sounds with an amended version of Smile called Smiley Smile.
Yeah, Smiley Smiley.
Well, let me tell you something. Smiley Smile might be the trippiest thing they've ever put out. Smile's weird and it's out there. They were all on drugs when they were editing Smile and they put out what was Smiley Smile. And I love the Smiley Smile record, but if they thought that was more normal than what Smile was, then they were all on drugs. They all were.
Probably, I assume.
Which probably they were. So, yeah.
Interesting.
They had tons of great records that follow Pet Sounds that are well worth checking out.
Okay, so they have... I'm looking on Spotify just because, guys, I don't... So they have the mono and stereo versions on each of the versions. I will listen to... I hate mono. I don't like the sound of mono.
Mono, you have to have the right setup for mono. Like, if you're just using regular headphones, stay far away from mono.
No thanks.
You have to have a very specific speaker setup to really get the mono experience.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we're getting on a tangent. Those are our favorite albums.
Those are our favorite albums: Dark Side of the Moon and
Dark Side of the Moon, The Beach Boys, Pet Sounds.
You do know that needs to be the thumbnail now.
Oh, this? Yeah.
Yeah. Just us holding our two favorite albums.
Well, then it's going to give it away.
So? Or it will be clickbait. Who knows?
Now, what's your favorite album in the comments on YouTube? And also, which one's better? It's Dark Side of the Moon.
Fuck off. No, it's not.
You cannot compare these albums. I don't think.
No, I don't think you could, but they have a lot of similarities, though.
Yeah. I like a lot of the stuff that you said about that you were saying about Pet Sounds being a perfect album. Echoes exactly what I what I would say about Dark Side of the Moon. So yeah, it's cool.
If you're listening to us on podcast, I was shaking my head.
All right, guys. Well, that's I think it. We will hopefully be back next time with Lodger. This time, finally, and yeah.
The end of the Berlin trilogy.
Yes, and thank you for watching. That was really fun. Like I haven't been able to gush about Dark Side of the Moon in a long time, so thanks.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. But yeah, like Rob said, let us know. Got to get more action in the comments, guys. But to be fair, we got to be better with responding to you guys in the comments as well. Tell us what your favorite album is. Please like, subscribe. If you prefer listening audio only, we are on all major podcast platforms.
Everything. So Spotify,
check us out, and
YouTube.
You interrupt me one more time. All right, on that note.
I was trying to interrupt you. On that note, go listen to Pet Sounds and Dark Side of the Moon, and subscribe. Love you guys. The outro's getting as bad as the intro.
Yeah, we're amateurs.
Oh well.